we have a few people still just logging in, but we're going to get started so that we don't run over time. Welcome and thank you for joining this morning. Just wanted to run through a few things. Firstly, the event today is going to be a couple of hours, but it's split into two halves, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the agenda. And also, I will just run through a couple of minor housekeeping things. So I am recording the session. This is mostly so that the talks can be used as a resource for other people who couldn't join us today. There's a few people who weren't able to join but wanted to still see them. So obviously, if that's an issue in any way from a privacy point of view, please do feel free to keep your cameras off. I think everyone is on mute, and thank you for that. So if you're chatting or contributing, feel free to take yourself off mute, obviously. But if during the talks you could keep yourself on mute, that would be great. Again, feel free to be video free during the talks. But if you want to contribute and you're happy to keep your camera on to do that, please do feel free to kind of come and join the room. We'll do verbal questions after the talks, but feel free to put things in the chat as we go. And I just wanted to also say thank you so much to the Fellowship, the Churchill Fellowship, the Rank Foundation, and our 5 speakers today, both for the financial support for the research and also coming and presenting their work directly to you today. Also, I'd love to stay connected after this around this agenda. I don't want to presume because you're on the event today and you're in the room that you want to stay in touch, but I'll share a Google form later where you can let me know if you do, or feel free to drop me a note on LinkedIn or on email. So today we're going to have 5 speakers from Belgium, the USA, and France, and the Netherlands. I was lucky enough to go and visit most of these speakers in their home countries and see the amazing activity that they are delivering there, other than the USA. So Elizabeth and I did meet up, but that was in London. And what I wanted to do was bring that inspiration and these incredible stories to you directly. Hopefully some of you have had a chance to read my report, but if not, I also wanted to make sure that these stories were inspiring the work we do in the UK and helping us to ask and answer some really tough questions. So we're going to focus on those 5 speakers in the first part of the event. We'll have a short comfort break, although obviously feel free to take a break whenever it suits you. And then we'll move into some light discussion. Because I wasn't sure how many people would want to stay on for that. It's been a little bit challenging to plan that out. So we're just going to keep it really light. We're just going to kind of talk a little bit about what's inspired us today and what role we play in the system in the UK and the sorts of things, the sorts of changes we'd like to drive. But if you'd like to stay on for that, I'd love to hear more about your reflections on the event and also in your work. We'll wrap up by 12. And like I said, if you do want to drop off at the break point, do feel free. In terms of intros, I think it's always really nice to kind of know who you're in the room with, but we can't go around everyone in the room to do intros. So what I thought we'd do is jump into breakout groups and just spend a couple of minutes introducing ourselves to 1 or 2 other people in the room, just so we get the opportunity to know who's around us. So we'll do that, and then I'll bring you back, and I'm going to spend a few minutes just telling you about the research I did, why I took the approach I did, and then I'll introduce our speakers. This says, I'm not very technological, so this is the point at which, when I try and do breakout rooms, it might be a little bit clunky, so do bear with me. So if you could just spend a few minutes introducing yourself to the people in your breakout rooms, and also tell them a little bit about something you'd like to get out of the event today, a question you're looking to answer, or some inspiration you're looking to harness. I think that would be a great way to start the session. People are just slowly rejoining the main group, so we'll just give everyone a few more seconds to come back into the room.
Ouais.
Great, so welcome back into the room. And if you came off mute for that, please do go back onto mute. Great, so I'll just introduce myself. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Clara Snow, nee Widdowson. I have spent most of my career in food, so about 11 years working in food in lots of different roles, but primarily in non-profit work, working on food access and health issues. I have a background in design and innovation, which has underpinned a lot of the approach I've taken to food. So working on new models of food access in particular, looking to test and iterate and scale new models. So that started with social supermarkets, moved into children's nutrition during the school holidays, and also recipe boxes, so new models of distribution. And I now work for an organization called Nesta, where I'm a mission manager, which is a portfolio manager, managing various programs that look at how we can make food environments healthier for people. I founded Dish Up Recipe Boxes, which is kind of a small organization I co-founded and run directly. So I work kind of in larger organizations and charities, but also at that more grassroots level as well, which gives me kind of some really interesting viewpoints. And I'm a Churchill Fellow. And indeed, that's where this research came from. I was given my fellowship in 2018 for 2019. Unfortunately, it was disrupted by COVID. So my flight to the USA was booked for, I think it was the 20th of March. And we went into national lockdown in the UK a couple of days later. So I wasn't able to do my research. And then as we kind of came back from COVID, I started thinking about it again. Lots had changed during that time. So the impact of COVID globally had really made this issue more prevalent, more visible, but also had accelerated some of the solutions. And lots of organizations started working in this space and started thinking about new solutions or scaling solutions. So the landscape really did change quite dramatically between me putting in my application in 2018 to research multifunctional food hubs and conducting my research this last year, 2024. And so I'll explain a little bit more about the approach I ended up taking. My guiding questions for the research were, how can high quality, healthy foods produced fairly and sustainably be made more accessible to citizens at risk of food security? I'm very much interested in quite synergistic solutions that try to create systems that tackle multiple issues at the same time. And how can those systems be designed and delivered and do that at scale so it impacts as many people as possible? All models are wrong, as we all know. This one is really helpful to me. So I just wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about the way I approached my research. So the speakers that we're going to hear from today all kind of sit differently in this in Bakana's two loops model. Bakana's two loops model tries to explain how systems can change. It talks a little bit about the idea of kind of minimizing former systems and growing new systems and what happens in between. So some of the activities that I visited really sit in those kind of pockets of the future. They are, and Le FAITOut is with us today, and I'd very much think that that's, kind of a pocket of the food system we'd like to see in the future. But they are also connecting and networking people working in that space, and creating a physical environment where people working on that agenda can come together. I also looked at emerging systems, so some of the programs in America and also the Solidarity Food Funds, where they're looking to create a blueprint of a new system and test that blueprint. And then also bridging and new systems. So thinking about the Amsterdam Healthy Weight Program, that's very much a system or an initiative that's trying to create a bridge between an existing system and a new system and work through that transition process. So from my point of view, I really wanted to kind of explore different levels of this model and explore different initiatives that kind of are trying to change the system or at a different stage in their system change journey in order to get that full view. So we're going to hear from some great people today. I'm going to pass over to Jonathan to kick us off in a moment. And he's going to talk us through the right to food from practice to policy. Thanks to Beth for the suggestion. She was very eager to hear about the right to food. So Jonathan is going to focus in on that, having been trained in law and having the right to food as a big part of his personal agenda in this space. We'll then hear from Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is working and has worked across multiple programs in the US and big ambitious programs. So she's going to talk us a little bit through the various strategies to grow and support food access and develop local food systems. We'll hear from Baptiste and Agathe from Le FAITOut, which is a multifunctional food hub. That's not a term they use in France. It's a third space based in just outside of Lyon. And they're doing incredible work to sort of try and test how can you improve food access for a community where a lot of people come from low-income households. And then we're going to wrap up with Angie, who's talking us through applying a systems approach to public health and dietary interventions. Now, a lot of Angie's experience is on the Amsterdam Healthy Weight Program. As part of this research, I spent 3 weeks in Amsterdam working with Angie and meeting lots of people involved in that program. I do just want to say that it might feel, because we're talking about food access today, and Angie's going to talk a lot about obesity and dietary interventions, it might feel a little bit like that's not necessarily a related talk. Obesity is disproportionately represented in low-income communities and low-income households, and that's because barriers to food access is a major driver of unhealthy diets and obesity. And those people with those experiences are therefore at risk of poor health as a result of their diets and of barriers to food access. So whilst obesity is a little more of a symptom of food access, I think it's very appropriate that we think about how we can improve people's diets and how we can improve food access for the sake of their health. Also, I think because the program itself is so interesting, it's one of the best resourced and biggest system change initiatives in this space in the world. I think it's a really interesting example of how you can approach changing a system. So really excited to hear from Angie today as well. So introducing Jonathan. And I think, Jonathan, did you want to share slides from your laptop directly? Would you like me to stop sharing?
Actually, I added the slide on yours, so now it's working.
Fabulous.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Clara, for inviting me. I will be here speaking with two caps. The one is FIAN Belgium, for who I work and who is really in charge of promoting and defending the right to food in Belgium. And so the right to food is more saying about what to do rather than how to do it. So the what to do is everyone has an access to food, let's say to good food in Europe and in Belgium. And the social security for food I will speak here about is really a way to think about the how to do it. And because I know I don't have so much time, I will present very quickly the CREASA, which is a national collective in Belgium who is promoting this question of social security for food. And so what do we do in that collective? We do studies, legal and economic feasibility were the two subjects we really dig on. We also follow up on a pilot project. And here I will speak later on one of them, which is La Classe, as we call it here. We do conference, webinar, stands, workshop, and we speak to a lot of people in, we call it a popular education way. So also a way to speak about food in general. And we make advocacy work with the idea to put food policy at the agenda in Belgium. And maybe on the next slide, you will see who sits at the CREASA, because it's important to put it simple. We already defend a systemic vision of food, So we don't want to speak of food only from the point of view of agriculture, but we have anti-poverty organizations, we have public health and health promotion services, or yes, let's say services. We have associations struggling for a better environment, and of course, a lot of people in the economic sectors, so from the production to the distribution side. And together we try to have this common vision on food, which is kind of a revolution rather than just speaking of food from the point of view of agriculture. And there is also some link. Just in few slides, what is this question of social security for food? I put it here in a circular view. The goal, or I mean the spirit, is to be inspired in the social security as it is built here in Belgium or in France, as it works for very fundamental rights as health, pension, or family funds. Basically, we want the people to contribute, everyone to contribute to build up a fund which will be redistributed through a monthly allowance of 150 euro. So you will get a card. That's why I put the picture of a card. You have a credit card and you can buy food, let's say, to make it simple. But you cannot buy every food. You can buy only the food that the people will have choose to be viable. Or so with the money you cannot buy every food. To put it simple, here also we go on more local, sustainable, just priced food. And a very important of democratic process because it's really in the hand of the citizen. So you also create cohesion and empower the people. And so it's also an investment in the food supply chain, of course, because the money you will gather, it will be spent on the supply chain we want to support. And that's why it's circular in the end. There is 3 pillars, so I will try to be faster because I don't have so much time for that. But the first one is solidarity. So we ask everyone to contribute to the social security for food. And the financing is proportional to income of the affiliate. So the more money you have, the more money you put into a common pot. And we also ask for public funding because it's also a way for the states to invest on future and to try to tackle a lot of hidden costs we know on the industrial food from the industrial food sectors. So the second pillar is the universality. So we don't want to have this discourse of the problem of access to food is only on the shoulders of poor people. It's a problem that is socially, it's a social problem for everyone. So everyone also need to contribute and everyone need to benefit from the social security for food. So here everyone will get 150 euro a month on a card, which is the budget of the most vulnerable people in Belgium, let's say. And you will be able to use the card everywhere where you buy food. So in the stores, in the peasant market, for paying the canteen, or in a restaurant, etc. It should be convenient. And the third pillar is democracy. We call it democratic agreement. So the people have to discuss together and to find an agreement on what is the food we want to support and we want to buy. As in our collective in Belgium, we found on 4 criteria, but we are still in discussing a 5th one. But the food should be sustainable, it should be fair prices, short chain, and we should exclude ultra-processed food. And maybe some people are willing to add a criteria about social economy, so how to really not go on the very capitalist, too much industrial food sectors, let's say. And so now I will try to present the pilot project. And yes, there is a whole historical, because we are working on that question since maybe 5 years, let's say, but as Clara, you said it, there is something about the COVID. So since the COVID, there was more public fund available to also tackle this issue. And this allows us to have several small project, but now we have that one, which is La Classe. In English, it should be Scarbeck Local Food Solidarity Fund. Our objective is to have in June this year 100 people contributing to a common pot, and then to grow up to 500 and maybe 1,000, our dream in 2027, which that will make 1.8 million euro budget. And it's very important to say that in this scheme, you have the democratic process, but you also have the money that come. So you have the political discourse and the mean to implement it. And I think it's a big difference with this social security for food system. So maybe we can skip that. It's just a way to say that in Scarbeck there is 100, there is a lot of inhabitants, and only less than 5% of the shops that are providing good food in the district. Here it's in French, but it is the same things as a principle, but for the project pilot. So we have the people financing a common budget, that's the financement. We have a democratic governance to discuss about how to use the money, and we will have agreed shop that will be used by the people to buy their food. It's very simple, but it's very efficient in the influence and in the way for empowering people to really become the actors of their own food and not be just passive consumers. Yeah, you can skip that because it's a bit on the numbers. And maybe the most important here is that we have 40 people now working since November, and they have to decide together on two things. What are the shop they want to use and they want to support, and how to make this contribution and their own money contribution work. So precise the operation of the membership fee, that was the translation. But it's really, we want 150 euro, how much we ask to everyone and to each category of people. And it's not an easy task to do. We will see a very strong citizen empowerment, and I think that's the most important, because there is strong engagement of people in favor of the right to food, and there is a strong social cohesion, despite the fact that the people are very diverse in the group. And yes, clear impact on supporting local food shop, restoring political hope in the food matters. It's really important because the people think they can do something, and it's a way for them to really act for the right to food. And it's changing a lot because we don't have such a scheme in Belgium, rather than we just have political discourses. But here, the people become really the actors of the change. And that was my last one. I just put a picture because to give you a taste of the spirit of the scheme we are now developing. So many thanks.
Jonathan, thank you so much. I know that you had to disappear at 10:30 for another meeting. Do you have a few minutes for questions?
Yes, no, actually I have half an hour, so I can stay
Great.
more. Yeah.
Perfect. In that case, can I invite everyone in the room to come off mute if you have a question for Jonathan, or to pop it in the chat? And we've got about 5 minutes for questions for Jonathan before we'll move on.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi. Sorry, go on.
Could I just ask a question of what sort of is the proportion of the people who are involved in the project which you've just described who are experiencing food poverty, as opposed to the people who perhaps got higher salaries?
Yes. So we are very clear because we try to follow the demographic statistic of the district. So in the end, we have 20%, 30% of people having low income. We have 50% of middle class income, and we have 20% of rich people, which is kind of reality. We also follow the same principle for the genders. So we have half-half, which is not an easy thing because food is generally very on women, let's say. Sorry, I don't really know the terms, but to have the half-half was kind of a challenge, and here we try to do it. And we also have a diversity in the age of people, but unfortunately, we miss a bit the young people. So we don't have enough young people in the scheme, but we will try to correct that later.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Hi, yeah, thanks, Clara. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I work in Belfast and and chair the Sustainable Food Partnership. So I'm really interested in kind of, place-based responses that really kind of enact the right to food. I suppose, do you have any tips or kind of if you were starting this again, have you learned anything that you wouldn't do, or things that actually like do you know what I mean? Was there something that was like actually that wasn't helpful? Is there any kind of do's and don'ts that you could share?
It's a good question, a bit tricky, let's say. Just to say that we were very inspired by a project which is similar in France, in Montpellier. So we already have some, let's say, speed up, and we copy paste a lot of things. So it was a great help for us. Maybe something I won't do, or we still try to do, but we don't really make it, and it's a problem. It's looking for public money.
Okay.
So it's also a way for me to introduce something very important in the social security philosophy, because here the idea is that the people themselves try to find a solution to feed themselves good food. And we're still trying to find public money to say, okay, but we could have some money in the common budget, so the people, they don't have to contribute so much. And this is taking so much time. And here the political context is very negative. It was positive like 2-3 years ago, but it's changed now. It takes too much time, and it's reduce the impact of let's just do it ourselves. So maybe this is could be my advice. Do not just expect too much from the public fund, and just try to do it ourselves. And it's true for the small project pilots. And to be honest, we have the money for framing and working on the organization, but not for the common pot. It's something to find some money from 100 people, because it's 20,000 euro a year, so it's not so much. But when we will grow, we will need more and more public money, and we will have more and more difficulties for getting them. So that would be something. Just don't rely too much on public money and do it yourself, especially on project pilots. We don't need so much the help of the state, and it's not always a facilitator. It could be also something that stuck us, let's say, block us.
Thank you so much, and thanks for speaking today.
And just maybe to add, we're also trying to maybe create kind of a European network to exchange on similar initiatives. So maybe I know that UK or Belfast more in the European Union, but still, I'm also here to try to create maybe some links and connection with UK people. So I wrote Belfast on my small paper.
I will be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Does anyone have any more burning questions for Jonathan that you really want to squeeze in? I think we can probably squeeze one more in, otherwise we'll move on.
Hi, Jonathan. Just a quick one. You mentioned in your presentation that people contributed according to their income. And I wondered how you managed that. Is it a voluntary, or do you have some sort of process that's dignified?
Yes, it's actually we work a lot on that. The results we had is it's a bit complicated, so I will try. But the idea is that when we are in the middle of the income in statistics, you will contribute 150 and you will get 150. So you don't lose, you don't get. Then we will have, and it will be voluntary and based on objective criteria. So that's why it's kind of complicated. So we will ask the people their income, and to bear in mind of a very important depends, or they will have also maybe the houses, these kind of things, and we will get the first prize. And on this price, we will add, and sorry, I don't know also in English, but we will ask them, they will be able to add 20% more and 20% less on the indicative numbers. But very important, we will not control them. So the people, they can put the numbers they want, and they can lie if they want, and if everyone lie, it won't work. So it's really on the responsibility of the people to also put the right number in order to give more or less. So it's indicative, but based on objective criteria. That's how we do it.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. Most interesting.
Thanks.
Right, Jonathan, thank you so much. And thank you so much for presenting in English as well. My experience of going over to France and Italy was everyone said to me, I don't speak any English. I have to warn you, I don't speak any English. And then you all speak brilliant English. So thank you so much for the do that.
Thank you for the invitation.
So we'll move on to our next speaker, Elizabeth. Elizabeth and I first met in Brixton because she did a stint working in London, which was very fortunate for me. So I've been hearing a lot about her work over the last few years, and she's moving on to do some really interesting new things. I want to say a particular thank you to Elizabeth because when I scheduled this, I was thinking about the UK and Europe. I was not thinking about at the time in the USA. So we did start at 5 a.m. in where Elizabeth is in North Carolina. So particular thank you to Elizabeth for the early morning and also for giving a bit of extra support thinking through the facilitation of this session. So Elizabeth, over to you. I think I have given slide control over to all speakers, but if it doesn't kick in, I can manage slides.
All right. Well, thank you, Clara, and I'm so excited to be here. And Jonathan, impressed with your presentation in English. If I had to present in French, this would be a total train wreck. So I'd rather wake up at 5 in the morning and do this than that. My name is Elizabeth Atwell. I am coming to you from Durham, North Carolina, which is in the southeastern part of the U.S., where it is indeed early enough that even my 6-month-old puppy has decided it is far too early to be awake. Let's see, Clara, I am not seeing how to advance the slide. So do you want to just go to the next one? That's perfect. Thank you. So I'm a founding partner at Seed Change Strategies with my colleagues Will Gray and Ellie Baumstein, pictured here, looking adorable. We support organizations across the United States that are working to transform the U.S. food system towards a system that promotes regenerative ecological practices, that reinvests in small-scale farmers and shifts economic power away from corporate monopolies and back towards local communities. So in this role, we wear many hats as facilitators, as researchers and consultants, but core to everything that we do is a belief that systems change is only possible when we cultivate intentional and trusting collaboration. So almost all of our work focuses in one way or another on facilitating networks and cooperative efforts to transform our food system. I'm excited to talk to you today about some of the efforts happening across the U.S. that aim to both help poor folks access healthy, fresh, nutritious local food and invest in small farms and local food systems. I'm particularly going to focus on one program that Clara featured in her report called the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program. But before I can really get into that, I think I need to paint a bit of a picture of what the U.S. food system looks like today. So if you are a small family farm or food business, particularly one that invests in values like ecological sustainability, animal welfare, fair wages, good labor practices, you face an incredibly steep uphill battle in today's food and agricultural system in the United States. As you can see on this slide, decades of corporate consolidation have concentrated market power into the hands of just a few giant agribusinesses, which makes it exceedingly difficult for independent producers to access fair prices, distribution channels, or essential resources like land. Let's go to the next slide. So industrial food production benefits from massive government subsidies, economies of scale, and policies that favor large-scale operations, which leave smaller, values-driven businesses struggling to compete. Supermarket chains and food service companies demand ever lower prices, which squeeze out farmers and producers who refuse to cut corners on labor, on soil health, on environmental stewardship. It's an incredibly efficient system. I can get salad greens that were harvested in Salinas Valley, California on Monday on my plate or in my grocery store by Thursday. but the result is a system that rewards extraction and exploitation while making it nearly impossible for small-scale and values-driven farmers and food businesses to survive, much less thrive. So as a result, we lose about 2,000 acres of farmland to development every single day. And the patterns of who gets to own that land, who can access capital and resources in our agricultural economy reflects the structural inequities that permeate the rest of our society. So for example, 100 years ago, African Americans owned about 14% of US farmland, and today that number has dwindled to less than half of 1%. Also notably, approximately half, by some estimates more by others, of hired US farm workers are undocumented immigrants, meaning the people that grow and pack and process our food are grossly underpaid and lack even some of the most basic labor rights. Meanwhile, about 14% of Americans experienced hunger or food insecurity just last year. And notably, food insecurity also disproportionately affects people of color and also children. Among the wealthiest countries in the world, the US has the highest rate of people struggling to afford enough food. As everyone in this room knows, hunger is not a problem of food scarcity. Over 1/3 of food in the US is wasted, is thrown away. It's a problem of poverty, inequality, and a food system that reflects a larger economic system that prioritizes profit above all else. So to address this massive chronic problem of hunger, there's a massive ecosystems of organizations, but with some notable exceptions, much of our efforts here in the States focus on treating the symptom and not the cause. So a fixture of the US response to hunger are called food banks. And a food bank is a nonprofit organization that collects, stores, and distributes foods to local agencies such as food pantries and meal programs, which directly assist individuals facing food insecurity. Despite their mission to alleviate hunger, food banks often contribute to the same systemic issues that perpetuate our inequitable food and economic system. So most of the millions and millions of pounds of foods that are distributed through food banks come from excess production or waste streams of corporations. These corporations receive both tax write-offs and good PR for donating or selling their food to food banks. In 2022, 1 in 6 Americans received food assistance through food banks and hunger relief programs. Despite the commonality of needing to access these resources, there is a lot of social stigma associated with participating in these programs. Also, with some notable exceptions, prior to COVID, very few food banks worked with local farms, and in fact, very few even provide fresh produce, much less culturally appropriate foods. So this picture I have painted maybe sounds kind of bleak, but it's important to know that in the United States, there is an extremely strong, connected, sophisticated, and growing social movement and economic sector of farmers, fishers, food businesses, restaurateurs, nonprofits, community-based organizations, and also just millions of people who love good food that are working to change our food system. In the last 25 years, as more and more Americans have grown to question where their food comes from and to seek out better, healthier, more delicious food, it's good for the people, it's good for the planet, we're shifting where and how we get our food. Key to making local values-based food accessible in supermarkets, restaurants, school cafeterias, and the places where most of us get our food day to day has been the growth of what we call food hubs. I know in another section we're talking about multifunctional food hubs, but in the US context, food hubs are organizations that connect local farms and food producers with wholesale, institutional, and direct-to-consumer markets. Hubs work to create new opportunities for small farms by aggregating, storing, distributing, and marketing locally sourced food. They do all of the complex, really hard work of figuring out logistics and transportation and supply chains and compliance so that farmers can focus on farming. So if I go to my local grocery co-op and buy a local apple, or if I'm eating at a restaurant here in Durham and I order a plate that has seasonal vegetables and sustainably caught North Carolina seafood, most likely that food got from the farm to my plate through a food hub. Between 2010 and 2017, the number of food hubs in the United States increased by about 300%, and since then has stayed pretty much steady as food hubs continue to grow and mature. So this picture that I'm painting in the US, we know we have big structural problems and a vast network of nonprofits and businesses focus on the supply side, focus on supporting small family farms, helping them access markets, helping it be viable to practice sustainable agriculture and grow resilient regional food systems. And on the other side, a large sector of nonprofits and food banks aimed at helping people in this country experiencing hunger access food. Yet for the most part, these sectors have operated pretty separately. COVID changed that. As Clara mentioned at the start, COVID really drew back, and we can go to the next slide, Clara. COVID really drew back the curtain on a lot of the chronic issues of food insecurity, the fragility of our agricultural supply chains, and the precarity of small farmers in the United States. I remember in 2020, in the course of maybe a single day, reading these articles in the New York Times, one about lines at food banks stretching for miles and miles down the road. Another about how farmers were dumping milk, were plowing over ready to harvest fields because they lost their markets that they would normally sell to, and now we're facing the very real possibility of failing. COVID was a rupture that forced individuals and organizations to build relationships with one another, to innovate, to figure out how are we going to support each other? How are we going to support our communities? It presented an opportunity to do things differently, and it really required us to do things differently. People looked around and said, okay, so these farmers need a place to sell their food or they're going to lose their business and they're going to lose their land. And these people are hungry and they need food. Now, what if these problems were each other's solution? So across the country, sometimes literally overnight, we began to see the proliferation of what we're going to call farm to food assistance value chains. These are supply chains which focus on connecting regional farms to local food assistance programs, often through local food hubs and working with local food banks. Let's go to the next slide. So in 2021, the federal government is looking around and seeing how important this work is. So the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, decided to launch a brand new program called the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program. Through LFPA, Local Food Purchase Assistance Program, USDA entered into non-competitive cooperative agreements with state, tribal, and territorial governments that in turn purchase locally grown and raised products to distribute through food assistance programs, such as food banks and food pantries. All food bought through this program was required to be sourced locally, so that meant within state or within 400 miles, or that's about 644 kilometers. And the program placed special emphasis on sourcing from what USDA calls underserved producers, which includes new and beginning farmers, farmers that identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, women farmers, and veterans. As of December of last year, this program has invested over $1 billion across the country. So because this program is being administered fairly independently by states, tribal governments, and territories, it looks a little different in each place. So for example, in Rhode Island in the Northeast, LFPA funds have helped food hubs like Farm Fresh Rhode Island source produce from small family farms and get fresh apples and leafy greens and dairy products into school meal programs and community food banks. In New Mexico in the West, tribal nations have used these funds to help purchase bison and traditional crops from native producers, reconnecting indigenous communities with culturally significant foods. So imagine being a family that goes to a food bank or a local nonprofit to get a box of food, and that food used to be cereal and chips and hot dogs and canned vegetables and maybe a gallon of milk, but today is filled with fresh, locally grown, healthy produce, meats, dairies, and eggs. By distributing this kind of delicious and healthy, culturally relevant food that any of us would be happy to receive, this program is not only investing in health and well-being, but it's shifting the narrative about the kinds of foods that poor folks can and should have access to. Go to the next slide. So in many ways, this program is a paradigm shift. Since World War II, the US federal government has spent a lot of money on food. But for the large part, those dollars go directly to supporting commodity crops and industrial corporate food systems. Now, here was a federal program that was investing over $1 billion in local farms, in food hubs, in food businesses, that was explicitly committed to supporting local agriculture, sourcing fresh, healthy, culturally relevant foods, and investing in farmers in a way that promotes racial equity. One more slide. So, despite these incredible impacts, the future of this program and that of a lot of federal programs in the US is incredibly uncertain right now under the Trump administration. Hundreds of government-supported programs, including LFPA, face the possibility of losing their budgets, of policy rollbacks, firing the public servants that administer these programs, all to support a political agenda that explicitly favors a corporate-driven food and economic system that prioritizes profit above all else, that systemically attacks programs that support racial equity and combat climate change, and that weaken our country's already very fragile social safety nets. But COVID was a rupture. It upended our worlds, but it forced us to use our imaginations to innovate, to call each other up and build new relationships and new types of programs and new ways of working together to solve some of our most entrenched problems. And there is no doubt that as we face climate catastrophes and the threats of our democratic institutions being challenged and undermined on a scale we've never seen, there will be a lot more ruptures. But I believe that through these struggles, as old systems die, new systems will emerge. So as we keep growing and learning and building here, know that I would love to connect with, share with, learn from people doing similar work in other countries. On the next slide, I've included my contact information, and please, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would be absolutely delighted to connect with you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. And I have a question about how you make the perfect tomato sandwich, but I'll follow up with you on that via email. Questions from the group for Elizabeth. We have about 5 minutes. Feel free to come off mute or pop them in the chat.
I had a question, Elizabeth. Hi, I'm Hannah from Sustain. I was just interested in, you've presented the kind of future as looking quite potentially concerning, but you still have hope. I was really intrigued about the sort of sustainability of the business models of the food hubs. So they've kind of been established through a kind of crisis period that inspired and a kind of influx of funding. But now that they're set up, do you see them as being kind of a now integral part of the system that is self-sustaining?
That's a great question, Hannah, and is a question that's on the top of the mind of many of the food hubs that I support. So Seed Change Strategies is the backbone organization for a network of food hubs called the Eastern Food Hub Collaborative. So through this network, we're trying to build resiliency in systems through strong relationships and food hubs supporting, learning from, and trading with one another. In the weeks and months following the election, there have been many meetings, and there is a real sense of fear, particularly as food hubs rely on programs, federally funded programs beyond LFPA. There, under the Biden administration, was a huge influx of funding to support climate smart agriculture. Many of those programs are gone now. In fact, all climate related funding is now gone from the federal budget. So I don't want to be glib about the real struggles that this is going to pose to food hubs, to food businesses, and to the farmers that they support. There are new and emerging models that I think are really exciting and are worth paying a lot of attention to. One that I'll just briefly touch on is the growth of what we're calling food is medicine programs, which there's starting to be a huge amount of investment and attention paid to doctors, health insurance companies, health service agencies prescribing fruits and vegetables, and some of it, not all of it, but some of it locally sourced, values-based grown food. So I also want to note that there's a lot of these farm to food assistance value chains that existed before COVID, and there's many of them that are not directly funded by the federal government. So I think that as we sort out the impacts of what's happening now, and truly it's kind of an hour by hour situation right now. There is the threat of real damage happening to these businesses, but I do think that there's opportunities to continue to innovate and evolve.
Thank you.
If we can go over to Bola.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that explanation. I just want to ask, in UK, we have Food Hub and we have Food Bank. CB Good Foundation work with Food Bank for the elderly people in the community. What different do you think that we have? Because I don't understand how American food system works. How do we benefit from what we are doing here? Please, thank you.
Yeah. Bola, can you ask that question in a slightly different way? I didn't totally follow the thread of it.
Okay, what I'm saying is that CB Good Foundation, we are based in United Kingdom, which is in open shore, and we are doing food bank in our organization to combat, poverty, cultural food bank. But in the US, does it work the same way as in Food Hub or Food Bank? Because Food Hub here, people have to pay some money, like paying like £5 to get food worth of about £10. Does it work the same way that it works in UK and America?
I will say, Bola, that my understanding of how things work in the UK versus the US is fairly anemic. And one thing Claire and I talked about in planning this was even the word food hub doesn't necessarily mean exactly the same thing in these different contexts. But that is to say, I would love to keep connecting with you and others on this call to continue to learn where there's overlap, where there's difference, and what we might learn from each other.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bola, I'm also really happy to spend some time with you on that question. I've spent a few years in America and really happy to try and kind of translate the different activities and kind of system approaches and also the terms with you as well. Don, go over to you for the last question, and then we'll move on to our next speaker.
Thank you so much. And sorry I was only able to join a bit later, so I joined sort of towards the end of your talk, Elizabeth, and desperate to find out more. So I've noted down details and may follow up with you. But I'm really interested in just hearing how the kind of management structures work and organizational structures work, and what kind of platforms also that you're using for the management, because these are like dream programs you're running, and you would obviously we would want these everywhere possible. But I can imagine that the reality of running these sorts of things is like an enormous task. And I'd be very interested in the nature of the teams that are running them, the nature of the resource in terms of kind of time and effort in them, and the leadership model, sort of how that works in terms of who's driving the responsibility of the tasks and stuff.
Absolutely, Dolly. That's a great question. So as you know, the United States is huge and it's extremely different. Maine, Mississippi, Minnesota, Montana, like these places are all their own little enclaves and have their own economies, culture, growing seasons. Recognizing this, when USDA established this program, they decided to use this kind of federalist model and give states, tribal governments, and territorial governments their own agency to craft the program and administer the program. So everyone was given more or less the same guidelines around prioritizing or requiring local sourcing, prioritizing sourcing from what USDA calls underserved producers. However, each state is a little different. Each tribal government is a little different in how they're administering it, which has pros and cons. The pros being that in the best case scenarios, these programs were able to be adapted specifically to the context and in the place where they're happening. Where I live in North Carolina, there are over a dozen food hubs just in this state. Other states may have one or none. Other states may have given a lot of money directly to food banks, where I mentioned the program in Farm Fresh, Rhode Island. A food hub there is the administrator for the whole state, but Rhode Island is a very small state, right? In the worst case scenario, that means that some state agencies are less invested in this program. So when you look at one state to another, in some places, this is really thriving and really important. And I think people are really administering this program with the intent behind it. And in some states, less so. In some states, to be honest, it has been a mess. I hope that it can continue so that we can continue to say, oh, this worked really well over here. Let's adopt this. That didn't work. Let's prevent that in the future.
And just really quickly on the funding. So it's federal funding. You've got, I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but I imagine that isn't, when you're starting to kind of try and spread it across. So is it something that some of the states that are going much further, are they sort of getting funding from other places to increase what they can do? And, or are these very lean teams that are running essentially what's happening in each area?
Another great question. I mean, truly $1 billion is a lot. I think the impacts of this kind of investment in local and regional food systems and communities has been profound in some places. But a lot of states and tribal governments, I called this a paradigm shift, and I think it's because a lot of localized or state agencies that wouldn't have thought about procuring from local farms are now thinking about this as not only a viable option, but a necessity for building resilience into our systems. So there are many states, Virginia, just north of me, North Carolina, where I am, have state programs now that are kind of replicating this model by dedicating state procurement dollars to this. So that is one of the reasons that, and also there's many programs that are supported by philanthropic endeavors. So even if federal funding goes away or is lessened, I think that there will still be a lot of programming and innovation that continues to happen.
I will move us on for time. We're just a few minutes behind, but Elizabeth has generously agreed to stay on for the discussion session. We haven't quite decided exactly how we're going to run that because it depends on how many people want to hang out with us after the talks. But it is an opportunity to ask more questions of Elizabeth, and also her contact details are there in case you want to follow up and ask for more detailed information. So I'll move us on. I have to confess, I went on Google Translate this morning and tried my absolute hardest to learn the pronunciation of Baptiste's and Agatha's surnames. I wasn't very good. I am going to butcher them, so I'm not going to attempt. So I'm just going to introduce them as Baptiste and Agatha. And they're going to talk us through the work they're doing just outside of Lyon in Le Faitout, which was an amazing place that I had the privilege of visiting and having lunch in. Unfortunately, we seem to have tripped over on the slide sharing. It's asking me to change settings. I'm a bit nervous in case I just close down the entire event. So please let me know when you'd like the slides to change.
Good morning, everybody. I am Baptiste Peycelon, director of the FAITOut, and like to introduce Agathe Falkowiez, administrative and financial manager of the FAITOut. Le FAITOut is an association, and thank you very much for inviting us here this morning. Being able to promote and to share the work we have done is a very valuable opportunity for us. A small disclaimer, as you might realize, I'm not so fluent in English, so please feel free to ask for clarification when needed. This presentation of FAITOut will be divided in 3 parts. The association, second part, access to healthy, sustainable food in all its form, and prospect for the future. Change, please. In this first part, we would like to briefly introduce the association mission, Le Faitout, is a multi-activity first place, where our core value are hospitality and food justice. And we keep this value in mind on our day-to-day activity. And for information, FAITOut in French is a stew pot.
Quick words on the genesis of the project and what we do daily. So it's a third place based on hospitality and food justice, located in the southern area of Lyon. We have 4 main pillars, which are the ecology, food justice, inclusiveness, and conviviality. We are based in La Solée, which is a working class neighborhood. A thing to know is like 40% of the inhabitants live under the poverty line. It's a place with no real good options in terms of grocery shopping. A couple of supermarkets and small supermarkets, and that's it. And the FAITOut was developed with the inhabitants as a place for bringing solutions around access to durable, sustainable, and great food for all inhabitants and all people working in the area. And we are focused on all the steps around food, access, transformation, and consumption. We have developed a food charter that is based on like everything we have in the FAITOut is vegetarian, locally sourced, on a short supply chain option. And it's something we apply in every steps of our activity. A couple of numbers.
Yes. Now we have 1,800 members. Each customer has to become a member. We are eating at the canteen. Now 10 hosted structure in the co-working space to working in favor ecological and social transition. And now 70 partner structures that came in Le FAITOut workshop public or private and took part in our programmation. In this section, we would like to present our report on sustainable food. The aim is to highlight the different forms of access: canteen, cooking workshop, market, world cuisine. A place experiment new form of food solidarity. We host several activities promoting a dignified access to sustainable food in pursuit of dynamic of co-construction between resident and the stakeholder to test and deploy the food social security type solution aimed to tackle food inequalities at work on the territory and enable experience sharing. 2 points important: hybrid economic model with 50% self-financing with canteen, co-working, and privatization, and the 50% through public donation and private funds. Second point is a reference point for solution to reduce inequalities in access to sustainable food in La Solée.
In a practical form, we have 3 main actions we run on a day-to-day basis. The first one is our canteen. So we have an ecological and solidar canteen in Le FAITOut. So vegetarian, of course, for us, and with organic products. And we have a solidarity wallet, you can say, with a triple tariffication system. So we have a basic price, then a reduced fee for people that are low income or like students, students or low incomes. And also we ask, you can say, people who come to eat to make a donation to our solidarity funds that allows us to generate tickets that we distribute through partners that are being what we've been working with. So people with very, very low incomes can come and eat for free at the canteen, the same meal in the same condition that everybody else. Another part of the solidarity is that we invite people that want to try and discover the jobs in restoration to come and work in our canteen for a couple of days or weeks. in real condition. It can be people that have been in a previous life and want to change their lives, or people that have no rights, no title, that are illegal, not illegals, but undocumented person that can come and work in the canteen. So they can practice the French of work of the canteen and so on. And we also host residents. So we give the key to the FIATOut to exiled chefs, so they can experiment what it is to have a restaurant for real, in real condition. The second main activity we have is kind of a market with VRAC. So it's another association we are working closely with. It's a solution for people to come and buy dry or fresh goods, with also triple tarification depending on where people live. So they can access organic, sustainable food from short circuits. It's an alternative to food banks, so people can choose what they buy, when they get it, and which quantities, depending on their needs and their habits. And the third part is a kind of encourage the empowerment of people around cooking classes that we are hosting with different structures or person. So they can change their habits of cooking and discover new products they might not know because they are not from the region and do not know certain vegetables or also certain element from the season. So it's give them the power to change their lives. And through this program, for example, inhabitants told us they needed a fresh market, and that's why we developed the fresh market with VRAC, in addition to the dry goods they previously had. For us, it's a way to empower and include all inhabitants from the neighborhood in the construction of Le FIATOut and our different activities to answer their real needs in terms of accessibility to food. And I had a couple of figures I missed before. So last year we had about 4,174 meals served at the canteen, included 220 solidarity meals. So about half of the, not half, sorry, so kind of lots of meals. And we had 48% that came to cook or discovered the works of restoration in the canteen, and 13 of them had positive outcomes, which mean they now work in a restaurant or have undertaken a cooking course or lessons or open their restaurant or have something to do with restoration around that. Yeah, maybe you can go to the future for us.
Thanks. This last part of the presentation responds to your innovative approach to project management, how systemic approach checks the different boxes of our ecosystem, in social, systematic co-construction of action, and how governance to meet the needs with the first people concerned. In the service, FIATOut offer and integrate all empowering pathway, providing in single entry, point to case, player, and information which everyone can access to contribute to. In economical hybrid, designed for its inclusive aim and to avoid any form of exclusion through price. For ecological, by promoting a sustainable and inclusive food chain and allowing producers to live off their work. And the partnership on the scale of metropolitan territory through innovative cooperative venture, social action, food system, resident, and security social alimentation. And for the perspective.
Yeah, in terms of perspectives, we have three kind of new or enhanced parts we want to have for the forthcoming years. The first one is open a social cafe. The idea is to widen our opening schedule. So for now, we are open on lunch and some of the evenings. We want to try to open for a whole morning as a cafe, a social cafe. So we're still working on the exact house, but that's an idea is to have a place where people can come and meet in the neighborhood. There is no cafe and no place like that close. We are working mainly about the inclusiveness and accessibility that is both financial or in terms of schedule. So that's the project. The second one is widen the grocery shopping option. So for now we have VRAC once a month where we can come and have goods. We are thinking of having our own grocery shop place in Le Faitout in order to have an easier access to this kind of food. And the third one is around more walking around a workshop, cooking workshop. And the idea is to help and not teach, but to have cooking classes. Sort of for today, we're having world food courses taking place in Le Faitout, and we are working with this chef to help them adapt their menus and their workshop to our charters, so having more vegetarian food, to rethink their supply chain options, so they are going through more local and sustainable food instead of having it through main supermarkets, as some have, because it's easier and or sometimes it's cheaper. So help them rethink the way they are constructing their workshops and financing themselves, so they have a better options and a more sustainable option for them and for the people coming to their workshops. And that's it for our perspectives. We wanted to thank all of you for your time. Thanks, Clara, again for the invitation. And yeah, and we have, if you have any question, there are a couple of, first more global view about France and what is happening. So we're having a couple of experimentation around the social security fund, like in Belgium. And today, I think, we have a French deputy from Lyon that is deposing a legal amendment in the Assembly for a right to food, for it to be really written in our constitution. So let's hope it's getting by.
Amazing. Baptiste, Agatha, thank you so much. And again, so much gratitude for you doing that in English. I know I definitely couldn't do French. We are running a few minutes late, but certainly let's make time for a couple of questions from the group if anyone has any. That's usually a sign that the presentation has been very comprehensive, so that's usually a good sign. I really encourage you, like I mentioned in the chat, Le Faitout is open to everyone. Anyone can go and enjoy the restaurant there. I really recommend a visit to Lyon for lots of reasons, but one is that you can visit Le Faitout. It's an old railway canteen. It's a beautiful building and it's been fitted out really, really beautifully. And there is also, as there is with the other case studies, a bit more information in the report, including a case study about VRAC, which works hand in hand with Le Faitout to manage and deliver the market. So do check out the report if you haven't already. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And we'll move on to Angie. As I mentioned, it might feel like a little bit of a step change that we're now going to talk about health interventions and obesity. The reason that we are doing that, Angie, sorry, it's flagging up your request to have your screen control, but unfortunately it's not allowing me to do it. So I'm very sorry to say that I'm not going to be able to do that, and I'll have to flick through for you. So yeah, it feels like a little bit of a step change, but as we know, obesity is one of the outcomes, and excess weight is one of the outcomes of barriers to healthy food access. So it's a very related issue, and Amsterdam Healthy Weight Programme is one of the most resourced and biggest programs, particularly looking at that systemic level of change that we can use as a case study globally. So a little bit of a different take, but a very, very important one. So Angie, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Angie Luna Pinzon, and the work I will be presenting today is actually part of the last 6-7 years that I used to work at the public health department of the Amsterdam UMC. University of Amsterdam, and most of actually all the insights I will be discussing are from 2 different case studies. And I will also want to emphasize that, as Clara said, I will be talking more from the public health perspective, but also from the public health, we actually try to change the health of improve the health of populations also within Amsterdam that are, for example, low deprived, have a lower social economic status. And there we see that it's not only obesity, of course, but also other health issues arise in this population. So although most of the talk will be focusing as the starting point of childhood obesity prevention, the insights that we gain from actually looking at that, we actually apply it to many different complex problems, but I will explain that later. Next slide, please. So when we look at the interventions that have been carried out for the past 30, 40, 50 years in public health, and also that the public health policy has implemented, we actually see that most of these interventions actually focus on individual levels factor. For example, we want to improve the daily fruit intake of children, we want to make these children move more, be more physically active. So we look at how the amount of minutes of hours that they are actively during the day. And also we actually, when we try to look at these interventions, we see they are more or less carried out in specific contexts, for example, at school or at home. There are also broader environments, for example, a neighborhood intervention, supermarkets. Then when it looks at healthcare system, societal norms, these interventions actually are not taking place in this context. So most of the interventions only focus on one specific context, such as schools, because it's easy to implement, it's more straightforward, it's also, and although that there might be political will to, for example, focus on broader context, on more individual, on more factors across these different contexts, what we see is that at the end of the day, obesity is still characterized as a factor, as a result of personal lifestyle decisions. So it's up to the individual to change that. Next, please. But when we really try to look into what's actually causing childhood obesity, it's not this is more or less like the iceberg model that you probably know. When we look at the top of the iceberg, we see, food intake, physical activity levels, but we were really interested into see like what's, and like I think Clara was the one also say, not just at the symptoms, but at the actual causes of this problem. And for that, we see that obesity is actually a result of many factors that are interacting with each other. They are also reinforcing each other, and they are present in different contexts. So if you take this into account, what does this mean in terms of, for example, the type of interventions that you will need to implement? And this way of looking at this problem, it's called systems perspective, and it's actually quite new in public health. So most of the research we conducted was, okay, if we look through this systemic lens at this problem, what does it mean for us? What do we learn from it? And how can we take and translate this knowledge into actual interventions that work? Next slide. And for that, we developed a framework that was actually the one that guide us through this whole process. And it's a quite complicated process, but I think the three main steps are: first, if we ultimately want to change a system, so we have a current system that's unhealthy, we want to have a system that produces healthy behavior, that produces high quality foods. How do we get there? Now, first, we need to understand what the current system is doing. What's the behavior of the current system? What's the ultimate goal? Why is it behaving the way that this system is? Next, we want to identify, okay, now that we understand the system, we are trying to see where in that system we can intervene. Where are these points that if we change and focus our energies into those points, they are called leverage points, then we are hoping to transition into the new system. And for that to be operationalized, we need some kind of interventions. Next slide. And this process of understanding the system and identifying where to intervene and then coming up with actions, it's a process that we actually operationalize by looking into 2 case studies. So the Amsterdam Healthy Weight Program is a program from the government of Amsterdam that has been implemented since 2013. with the long-term goal of no more childhood obesity in the city. So there are structural finances from this program. And what we saw is that most of the interventions focus on smaller children. So that's where the LIKE program came in, the research program. So we worked in collaboration with academia, public health, policy and practice, with this idea of translating the scientific insights into practical policies, actually. And LIKE specifically focus on 10 to 14 years, because what we see in the Netherlands is that after primary school, things start to get very bad for children in terms of health, because they have more freedom now to actually go to the snack bar and just buy unhealthy food. They listen less to their parents, so they have more freedom, they have pocket money, they start to get their own income. So a lot of things start to get into the unhealthy side of things. Next, please. So I know this, you're gonna read this, but it's just to illustrate it. So when we take this systems perspective, we actually want to map out the different factors that cause childhood obesity. So all these arrows that you see and all these variables, they're all different factors that we identified from the perspective of adolescents themselves, of scientists, and also from stakeholders, for example, in the community, from health organizations, from psychologists, from doctors. So we combined all the perspectives of these 3 different groups. And this is what they told us that were all causes from their perspective into childhood obesity. Next. So if we actually identified 5 subsystems that we think are the ones that actually reinforce obesity-related behaviors over time. So one of these systems is, for example, the interaction between adolescents and the social environment. One is about the interaction between adolescents and the physical activity environment, with a healthcare system, with socioeconomic system. And of course, because today is about food, one of these subsystems is indeed also the food system. And when we look at all these different subsystems, we actually say, well, all of this combined, they're just reinforcing obesity-related behaviors over time. So it's just exponentially growing. So there is no such system. For example, you would think the healthcare system would need to kind of break this exponential growth, but this is not happening. So why is this not happening? Well, one of the reasons that we identify is because on the individual level, this whole system is actually maximizing short-term gratification. So think, for example, in terms of social likes. So if you post a picture, you are craving for the to have so many likes as possible. If you are watching a movie, you want and you see an ad. Oh, I also want to eat what I'm watching, and I want it now. So this is really driving this system. And on the macro level, we'll see that actually most of all these systems want to maximize economic growth. So how do you go against such a huge goal? Next. So if we zoom in into the food system for the purpose of making this a little bit more illustrative and easier to understand. So this is one of the systems that we looked into. And as you can see, there are all arrows that are connecting to each other and different mechanisms that are actually reinforcing these unhealthy behaviors of let's say, the unhealthiness of the food system in Amsterdam. So if we look at this as a problem, we try to see, okay, this is the current system. It's the behavior in a way that the outcome is indeed profit making from unhealthy food. And this is actually, if we want to change the system, we really need to do something about changing the ultimate goal. Because if you focus on changing just the symptom, the goal is still going to be there. So if you really want to change it, you need to change the goal, and therefore the behavior of the system will also change. And what was what we found to be the goal driving this system? Well, profit maximization, which can be achieved by selling as much food as possible, with the more profitable option being unhealthy food. And there you see 2 pictures in the weight scale. when we look at, for example, smaller companies, food companies here in Amsterdam at the community level, we see that they are not able to compete against the large supermarkets that you can find in every corner of the neighborhoods, because the profits, the revenues made by these larger supermarkets are way too high. And even if the smaller, for example, food outlet might be interested in selling local, healthier, sustainable food, it's not profitable for them, because they still need to pay rent, they still need to make revenue. So there is an imbalance actually in the food system between the large food companies and the smaller local companies. Next, please. So, okay, now we develop an understanding of, for example, how this food system in Amsterdam is working. So the next step will be to identify where in that system we can intervene to make the food system healthier. And this we operationalize by identifying what we call leverage points. So those places in the system where a small shift can hopefully contribute of produce a bigger change in the whole system. And because it might be look, okay, how are we going to identify these leverage points? Is it going to be a random process? Of course not. Next, we use a framework that, next slide, please, no, Clara? Yes. So we identify, we use a framework developed by actually a colleague from the UK, James Nobles. And this really helps us actually to see to identify the leverage points. So if you look at the weight scale picture, on the left, you see this is the current system. And on the right, we want to transition into the desired system. So a system where healthy food is, for example, easy and accessible to everyone. So how can we achieve that? If you look at the different colors, those are how we think of as a weight. We attribute different weights to different interventions. So, for example, awareness campaign about the importance of eating fruits and vegetables for children, you will categorize it as an event. So it doesn't have, on the bigger picture, doesn't have too much weight, because it's not really going to change the whole system. And by doing this into the type of interventions, we can actually categorize interventions in events, structures, goals, and beliefs. So actually, for example, if we manage to come up with an intervention at the beliefs level, such as, for example, that the managers of the biggest supermarkets here will identify themselves as being responsible for the health of children in Amsterdam, that's going to be a change in beliefs, which is, of course, very difficult to achieve. But if you manage to do that, this belief intervention will have a lot of weight. So therefore, it will add to the picture underneath, and you will have a better chance of actually changing the system. So it's just a framework that we use to kind of attribute weight on the type of interventions that we develop. And ideally, you want to focus in developing interventions that target goals and the beliefs of the system. And of course, you also still need some events, because you need to take into account what's happening on the more community level. For example, you still need individuals to also make that change. Next, please. So we use this framework actually to come up with kind of interventions, actions, ideas. And this is more to illustrate that it's a very dynamic process. We may first come with an idea of, oh, maybe we are supposed to do something about, for example, supporting local entrepreneurs in offering healthy food. Well, if the local entrepreneurs are not really willing to work with us, then we need to change the idea, or then we need to find a window of opportunity, as you call it, to how can we make them actually want to work with us. And so it's a very dynamic process, this developing this type of actions. But one that I want to illustrate is that was very successful in our approach, which was we developed some kind of like meeting rooms where academics were present and also public health advisors were present. And these two groups actually met regularly, and they tried to come up to learn from each other to make the Amsterdam food system healthier. So it's called the Lobby Initiative. And there, for example, they will discuss things like how can we make sure that the new sugar tax, for example, gets implemented in the area. But I want to emphasize that it's very difficult to do this because then you are also, it's an open system. Then you come up with something like the ad here that the user, okay, so in the Netherlands, if a product has, for example, milk in it, you don't have to pay tax. So, and then this company, what they did is they added a little bit of there, I think it was 0.01%, just to avoid the tax. So then how do you do that? And go with that. Next slide, please. And for the Amsterdam Healthy Weight approach, we did this in the same. So next, because I have much time left. Yes. So what we actually did here is Amsterdam Healthy Weight program has been carried out for many years already. And one of the focus points for them is the actually changing the food environment in Amsterdam. So if what we see is that at the start of the program, for example, many activities were taking place in trying to change the food retail environment. They were focused more on events and structures levels, and it was, for example, promotion activities. Next slide. But then what we see now is that by taking the systems approach into account, actually the Amsterdam Healthy Weight program no longer focuses in one particular environment, but they try to come up with interventions that actually target multiple, or I would say even across different food environments. So for example, these interventions are actually also more abstract because they're more involved into, for example, lobbying, of advocacy, different policy developed implementations. So it's a longer process. You can argue whether it's still current intervention, but it's actually more like mini programs that you aim to develop and implement. And by looking through this systems approach, where actually the Amsterdam Healthy Weight approach also redefined and the whole way of working. So instead of, for example, working into clusters, they now work across clusters. So clusters, you don't really have them anymore. And by clusters, I mean, for example, public health is one cluster, another cluster is poverty, another cluster is professionals. So all these group teams actually now work together. And the last slides. So to wrap up, I actually wanted to emphasize that by looking at complex problems, such as, for example, the obesity problem, but also food accessibility, smoking, these are all examples of actually complex problems. And by taking the systems approach, what we want to emphasize is like, if we continue doing the same that we have been doing for the past 40 years, the system is not going to change. So you need to come up with different interventions. And for this, of course, you also need to fight the current system. And what we see is that there would be conflicting established systems goals, because what the food industry wants is not the same what the public health department may want, which is not the same what a local entrepreneur may want. So how do you go along, be trying to come up with collaborate among these different stakeholders when you have such conflicting values and goals? And it ultimately also depends on what's on the agenda of the political choices at them. If you have a very empowering political actors that really want to invest in this, or if they pay no attention to this. So yes, that was it for my side. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Angie, thank you so much. Because of time and your presentation, we've cut into questions a little bit. So if it's okay, if anyone has questions for Angie, what we'll do is pop them in the chat and I'll get them over to Angie and I'll make sure the response comes back. Angie, thank you so much. I also want to say thank you to Angie because she hosted me in Amsterdam for 3 weeks and was incredibly kind and generous and has just been a great supporter of this report. So thank you.